The message came late at night, long after I should have been asleep. I was sitting in the darkened living room, nursing a glass of bourbon, my thoughts spiraling as they had for days. Ever since I found the text message on Emily's phone, I hadn't been able to think straight. It was a message from her coworker, Greg, someone I'd never liked. "Missed you today? Can't stop thinking about last night." Just reading it again made my stomach churn. I'd replayed every interaction between them in my head since then. I kept telling myself it was a misunderstanding, that there was a perfectly innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew better. Emily had lied to me before, small lies. Harmless ones, I'd thought. This wasn't small. I hadn't confronted her yet. I didn't know how. I needed proof, real proof, not just a single text that she could wave away. But no matter how much I searched, I hadn't found anything else. Until tonight. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. An unknown number. At first, I ignored it. But then it buzzed again. "I know what your wife is doing." My heart stopped for a moment. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. The bourbon in my hand suddenly felt heavier. "Who is this?" I typed. The response came almost instantly. "Someone who can help you." I frowned, suspicion clawing at me. Was this some kind of sick joke? A scam? I thought about deleting the messages, blocking the number, but curiosity got the better of me. I had nothing to lose at this point. "Help me with what?" There was a long pause before the next message came through. "She's been lying to you. It's worse than you think. If you want the truth, you'll follow the clues I give you." I leaned back on the couch, my mind racing. What the hell was this? Part of me wanted to throw my phone across the room, but another part, the part driven by anger and suspicion, refused to let go of the chance that this stranger might know something. "Why should I trust you?" I typed. The reply was chilling. "Check the parking lot at Birchwood Hotel. 3rd floor. Red car. You'll find proof." I sat there for a moment, staring at the message. The Birchwood Hotel was on the other side of town, a place I knew but had never been to. What the hell was going on? My gut told me this was a trap, but I couldn't ignore it. Not now. 20 minutes later, I was driving through empty streets, my mind clouded with doubt. What if this was just some prank? Or worse, what if it was a setup? I didn't like walking into unknown territory, but something about that message felt real. When I reached the Birchwood Hotel, the parking lot was eerily deserted. I pulled into the entrance and drove up the spiraling ramp to the 3rd floor. The place was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the concrete. And then I saw it, a red sedan parked near the far corner of the lot. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, watching the car in silence. "Am I really doing this?" I muttered to myself. I stepped out of the car, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The air was cold, and I felt a strange tension crawling up my spine. I approached the red sedan cautiously, glancing around to make sure I wasn't being watched. There was a folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. I hesitated before reaching for it, half expecting someone to leap out of the shadows. But no one came. I unfolded the paper. In bold block letters it read, "Greg. Room 218. See for yourself." I crumpled the paper in my hand, my pulse racing. Room 218. This wasn't just some random game, someone knew. Someone wanted me to confront the truth. But who? And why? I clenched my jaw, torn between going inside and walking away. The logical part of me screamed that this was reckless. But the anger and suspicion boiling inside me demanded answers. I had to know. I pocketed the note and walked toward the hotel entrance. The hallway leading to room 218 was eerily silent. The carpet muffled my footsteps as I moved past door after door. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe Greg and Emily together. Maybe nothing at all. When I reached the door, I stood there for a long moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I knocked once. No answer. twice. Still nothing. I pressed my ear to the door and heard faint movement inside. Someone was definitely in there. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it Greg? Was Emily here too? The temptation to kick the door in was overwhelming, but I forced myself to step back. Whoever had sent me the clue had warned me indirectly. They wanted me to see this on my terms, not to burst in blindly. I walked away, my hands shaking with adrenaline. I needed to plan my next move carefully. This wasn't just about catching my wife in an affair anymore. Something bigger was happening. And I wasn't going to let them play me for a fool. As I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed again. "Did you find what you needed?" I didn't reply. But one thing was clear, someone was watching me. I didn't sleep that night. The image of the red sedan, the cryptic note, and the door to room 218 haunted me. Who had sent the message? What were they trying to prove? And how did they know about Emily's affair? My mind replayed the moment I'd stood outside that door, listening to the faint sounds inside. I kept asking myself why I hadn't done more, why I didn't kick the damn door open or wait for Greg to come out. But no, I'd walked away. Something about the entire setup felt wrong. At dawn, my phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. "You hesitated. Don't make that mistake again." I stared at the message, anger flaring in my chest. This person thought they could control me, push me around like a pawn in their game. "Who are you?" I texted back. The response came immediately. "Someone who knows the truth. You want to know too, don't you?" I clenched my teeth. They weren't wrong. Every instinct told me to block the number, to walk away from this insanity. But if there was even a chance that they had real evidence, I couldn't ignore it. The phone buzzed again. "Your wife isn't just cheating. She's involved in something bigger. Go to the Southbridge warehouse. 3rd floor. Noon. Southbridge." That was the industrial part of town, where half-abandoned warehouses dotted the landscape. I knew the area well enough. Too many deals happened out there in the shadows, the kind no one wanted on record. If this was a setup, it was the perfect place for one. But I needed to see this through. By noon, I was parked outside the Southbridge warehouse district. Rusted metal structures loomed around me, their windows shattered and graffiti covering the walls. I felt exposed, sitting there in the open, so I pulled my hood over my head and exited the car. The air was thick with the smell of oil and decay. Broken glass crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the warehouse marked in the message. The large, rust-colored building loomed like a forgotten relic from another era. I found the entrance, a dented metal door hanging slightly off its hinges. It groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the warehouse was a vast, empty space filled with shadows and silence. Piles of discarded machinery lined the walls, and dust danced in the beams of light filtering through cracked windows. I spotted a metal staircase leading to the 3rd floor. My footsteps echoed loudly as I climbed, each creak of the stairs making my pulse quicken. What the hell was I walking into? The 3rd floor was just as desolate as the rest of the building. Rusted beams crisscrossed overhead, and rows of old storage crates were scattered across the floor. I scanned the area, my senses on high alert. Then I saw it, a small wooden crate with a sheet of paper resting on top. I approached cautiously, my eyes darting to every shadow. No one else seemed to be here. When I reached the crate, I unfolded the paper. It was another message. "She's lying about more than you think. Open the crate." I hesitated, glancing around again. The warehouse felt too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Finally, I pried the lid off the crate. Inside were stacks of documents, each one bearing a company name I recognized, Argus Holdings. It was Emily's company. I rifled through the papers, finding contracts, wire transfer records, and emails. One phrase appeared repeatedly: illegal asset transfers. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. Emily worked in the finance department. I knew that much. But these documents hinted at something far more serious than routine business operations. Money was being moved through shell companies, laundered in ways that looked suspiciously like criminal activity. And somehow, Emily's name appeared on several of the documents. The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't just about an affair. It never had been. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. I froze, my hand tightening around the edge of the crate. The footsteps echoed from the stairwell, slow and deliberate. Someone was coming. Quickly, I shoved the documents back into the crate and ducked behind a nearby stack of storage boxes. My heart pounded as the footsteps drew closer. I peeked around the corner and saw a man enter the room, a tall, broad figure in a black jacket. His face was partially obscured by a cap pulled low over his eyes. He scanned the room, his gaze sharp and predatory. I held my breath, crouching lower. Was this the person who had sent the messages? Or was this someone else tied to the scheme? Either way, I wasn't about to stick around to find out. The man walked toward the crate I had opened. He knelt, examining the papers inside. His movements were methodical, as if he knew exactly what he was looking for. After a few moments, he pulled out a small walkie-talkie from his pocket. "Yeah. Someone's been here," he said into the device. "They found the documents." I cursed silently. The man stood, scanning the room once more before turning back toward the stairwell. I waited until his footsteps faded completely before moving. I needed to get out of here, fast. Back in my car, I sat in stunned silence. The documents, the man in the warehouse, it was all too much to process. Emily wasn't just having an affair. She was involved in something dangerous, something criminal. My phone buzzed again. "Now you see. It's bigger than you thought. You have a choice, keep digging or walk away." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Walk away? Not a chance. I'm in." "What's next?" I replied. The response came almost immediately. "Stay sharp. It only gets darker from here." I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Even hours after leaving the warehouse, my senses remained on edge. The man I had seen there, he wasn't some random employee. He was there for a reason, and whoever he'd spoken to on that walkie-talkie knew about the documents I'd found. Emily's name on those records haunted me. She was tied to something illegal, something bigger than I had ever imagined. The affair with Greg seemed almost secondary now. Almost. I spent the afternoon poring over the copies of the documents I had managed to sneak out of the crate. They detailed a series of transactions between shell companies, money being funneled through fake accounts, offshore holdings, and risky ventures. Argus Holdings appeared on nearly every page, along with the names of several executives, and Emily. Her signature was there, buried in approval forms. I tried to convince myself that she might not have known what she was signing, but it didn't add up. If she was innocent, why was someone trying to cover it all up? Why had the informant sent me to the warehouse in the first place? My phone buzzed. "It's time you saw the full picture. Meet me at 46th and Edison. 9 p.m. Don't be late." This was different. Up until now, the informant had only sent me to places where they weren't physically present. But this message implied a meeting. It felt like a trap, but I had no choice. I needed answers. At 9 p.m. sharp, I arrived at the corner of 46th and Edison. It was an abandoned lot sandwiched between two dilapidated buildings. The only source of light came from a flickering street lamp, casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. I parked a block away and approached cautiously, scanning my surroundings. The streets were empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was nearby. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket, where I kept a small utility knife. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "David," a voice called softly from the shadows. I froze. The voice was deep, male, and unfamiliar. I turned toward the sound, my pulse quickening. A figure stepped out from behind a crumbling wall, a man in his 40s, with a lean, wiry build. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Call me Eric," he said, his tone calm but wary. I'm the one who's been helping you. Helping me? I repeated, incredulous. By sending me cryptic messages and leading me to crime scenes? Eric sighed, stepping closer. I needed you to see it for yourself. Your wife isn't just cheating on you. She's part of something bigger, something dangerous. You're in over your head now, but if you want out, I can still help you. I crossed my arms. You keep saying that, but I still don't know why you care. What's your angle? Eric hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. Let's just say I used to work for Argus Holdings. I saw things that could put a lot of people in prison. I tried to expose it, but they came after me. I had to disappear. And now you're using me to do your dirty work. I said coldly. Why not go to the police yourself? They wouldn't believe me. They're in Argus's pocket. You're different. You're connected to Emily. You can get closer than I ever could. Closer to what? I demanded. What's really going on? Eric's jaw tightened. Emily's been helping Greg move laundered money for years. They've been covering for each other, but now it's falling apart. Greg's in deep with some dangerous people, and if you dig too far, you'll be in their crosshairs too. A cold shiver ran down my spine. And you expect me to trust you? I expect you to survive, Eric said bluntly. You have two options: walk away, let them destroy each other, or keep going and risk everything. Your call. I stared at him, my mind racing. He sounded genuine, but there was still a nagging doubt in the back of my mind. What if this was another setup? What if Eric was working with Emily or Greg, trying to manipulate me? I'll think about it, I said, turning to leave. Don't take too long, Eric warned. They know you're looking into them. You won't get another chance. The drive home was a blur. Eric's words echoed in my mind, each one adding to the storm of thoughts already swirling in my head. Emily and Greg were involved in something criminal. That much was clear. But Eric's sudden appearance raised more questions than answers. Could I trust him? Was he really a whistleblower, or was he playing his own game? When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something odd. The curtains in the living room were drawn, but a faint light flickered inside, like someone had turned the TV on and off repeatedly. I stepped out of the car, my senses heightened. As I reached the front door, I heard muffled voices from inside. One of them was Emily's. I unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside. The voices grew louder. Emily was on the phone, pacing the room. No, I told you, I'm handling it, she said, her voice tense. He doesn't know anything. I'll take care of it. She stopped suddenly, turning toward me. Her eyes widened in shock. David, you're home early? I stared at her, the weight of everything I'd learned pressing down on me. Yeah, I said slowly. And we need to talk. Emily swallowed hard, her gaze flicking to the phone in her hand. For the first time in our marriage, I saw fear in her eyes. She knew. She knew I was closing in. Emily stood frozen in the living room, her eyes locked on me as if I were a ghost. The phone was still clutched in her hand, but she didn't dare look at it again. I closed the door behind me and took a slow, deliberate step forward. Go ahead, I said, my voice steady but cold. Finish your call. Emily hesitated, then quickly ended the call and placed the phone on the coffee table. David, what's going on? You're acting strange. Strange? I wanted to laugh. For days I'd been unraveling secrets I wasn't supposed to know, affairs, money laundering, and shadowy figures lurking in warehouses. Meanwhile, she had the nerve to pretend everything was fine. What's going on? I repeated, letting the anger seep into my voice. I think that's my question, Emily. You've been lying to me. And don't even try to deny it. Her face paled. Lying? About what? About Greg. About the money. About everything. I crossed my arms, watching her carefully. How long were you going to keep me in the dark? Emily's mouth opened, then closed again. She looked like a cornered animal, scrambling for an excuse. David. I don't know what you think you know, but... Stop, I snapped. Don't insult my intelligence. I've seen the documents. I know about the illegal transfers at Argus Holdings. I know about you and Greg. Her eyes widened, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. For a moment she was speechless, her carefully constructed facade cracking under the pressure. But then, like a switch had flipped, she straightened her posture and narrowed her eyes. Where did you get those documents? She demanded. Does it matter? I shot back. You've been playing with fire, Emily. And now it's all coming back to burn you. She stepped toward me, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You don't understand what's at stake here. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. I took a deep breath, keeping my composure. Then why don't you enlighten me? Emily hesitated, glancing toward the window as if expecting someone to be watching. This isn't just about me or Greg, she said finally. There are people, powerful people, who won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way. You digging around is going to put us both in danger. Danger, I repeated, the word hanging between us. Funny how you didn't seem too concerned about danger when you were sleeping with Greg. She flinched but quickly masked it with a glare. That's not what this is about. You think this is just some soap opera drama, but it's not. You need to stop looking into this, David. Walk away, before it's too late. I took a step closer, meeting her gaze head-on. I'm not walking away. Not from this, and not from the truth. So either you tell me everything right now, or I keep going until I find out myself. Emily shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with both fear and frustration. You don't know what you're doing. Maybe not, I admitted. But I'm going to find out. I left the house that night, unable to bear the tension any longer. Emily's half-confession had only confirmed my worst fears. There was more at play here than just an affair. The criminal network tied to Argus Holdings was real, and Emily was in the thick of it. But what she didn't realize was that I had help, Eric. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the number he'd used to contact me. It rang twice before he picked up. David, Eric said. I take it you spoke to your wife. I did, I replied. She didn't tell me much, but she's scared. Said there are people who'll come after us if I keep digging. She's right, Eric said grimly. These aren't people you want to mess with. They've been running illegal operations for years. Money laundering, fraud, blackmail. Greg's at the center of it, and Emily's been covering for him, knowingly or not. I clenched my jaw. How do you know all of this? I used to be on the inside, Eric explained. I worked in Argus's compliance department. I uncovered the scheme by accident. When I tried to blow the whistle, they framed me for embezzlement and ruined my life. I've been in hiding ever since. And now you want revenge, I said, piecing it together. Eric chuckled darkly. Revenge, justice, call it whatever you want. But you have something I don't, a personal connection. They'll slip up around you because they think you're just some clueless husband. I thought about that for a moment. He was right. Greg and Emily had underestimated me. They thought I was in the dark, unaware of the larger game they were playing. But that was their mistake. I want them both, I said quietly. Emily and Greg. I want this to end. Good, Eric replied. Then here's what we'll do. I'll give you everything you need to expose them. But we have to be smart about it. We can't go straight to the police, they're compromised. We'll need to build an airtight case. I'm listening, I said. Meet me tomorrow night. I'll have more intel for you, Eric said. And David, watch your back. They won't hesitate to take you out if they see you as a threat. The call ended, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stared out at the darkened streets, my mind racing. Emily was in deeper than I'd ever imagined. But she wasn't the only one playing games. I had my own plan now, and I wasn't going to stop until both she and Greg paid the price. I met Eric the next night at an abandoned service station just outside of town. The area was desolate, surrounded by tall weeds and rusting fuel pumps. The only light came from a dim bulb flickering above the station's entrance, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Eric stood near the door, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. He nodded when he saw me approach. "Glad you came," he said. "This might be the last meeting we can have without them noticing." "Them?" I asked, my voice low. "Greg's people," Eric clarified. "They have eyes everywhere. Once you started digging, you became a liability. They'll come after you if you're not careful." "Let them try," I muttered. I wasn't in the mood for fear tactics. "You said you had intel for me? What do you have?" Eric reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. He handed it to me with a grim expression. "This has everything: emails, bank records, surveillance footage. Greg's been coordinating with multiple offshore accounts. Emily's name is tied to several transactions." I stared at the flash drive, the weight of the information settling over me. "And what do you want me to do with this?" "Use it as leverage," Eric said. "You're in a unique position. They'll underestimate you because they think you're emotionally compromised by the affair. Play along. Make them believe you're cracking under pressure, but stay 2 steps ahead." I nodded slowly, pocketing the flash drive. "What's your angle in all this, Eric? Why are you really helping me?" Eric hesitated, his gaze distant. "Let's just say Greg ruined my life. I want to see him lose everything." For a moment I saw the pain behind his words, the kind of pain that comes from betrayal and loss. I didn't fully trust him, but I understood his motivation. We both wanted Greg to pay. "All right," I said. "Let's finish this." I spent the next few hours going through the files on the flash drive. Eric hadn't been lying. There was enough evidence to bury Greg and anyone else involved. Wire transfers, encrypted messages, and even photos of secret meetings. But one file stood out from the rest, a list of names, some of which I recognized as executives at Argus Holdings. Emily's name was there, along with Greg's. But there were others, people I didn't know. The network was bigger than I'd realized, spanning multiple industries and countries. This wasn't just corporate fraud, it was organized crime. As I read through the documents, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Eric. "We need to talk. Now." The message was from Emily. I hesitated before replying. "Where?" She responded almost instantly. "The park near the old courthouse. Come alone." The park was quiet when I arrived. The old courthouse loomed in the distance, its once majestic facade now crumbling and covered in graffiti. A few streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows over the empty benches and walkways. Emily was sitting on one of those benches, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked up when she saw me, her face pale and drawn. "You actually came," she said softly. "Of course I did," I replied, keeping my distance. "You said it was urgent." Emily stood and took a few hesitant steps toward me. "David, I need to explain." "Explain what?" I asked coldly. "The affair? The money laundering? Or the fact that you've been lying to me for years?" She flinched, but didn't deny it. "You have to understand, Greg, he pulled me into this. I didn't know what I was getting involved in at first. By the time I realized how deep it went, it was too late." "Too late for what?" I demanded. "You could have come to me. You could have told me the truth." "I was scared," she whispered. "These people, they're dangerous. They threatened me, David. They threatened us." I crossed my arms, studying her carefully. "And now? Why reach out to me now?" "Because Greg is losing control," she said urgently. "He's panicking. If he finds out that you've been digging into the finances, he'll come after you. You need to stop before you get hurt." I narrowed my eyes. "You think I'm just going to walk away from this?" "You don't have a choice," Emily said, her voice trembling. "They won't let you expose them. You have no idea how far they'll go to protect themselves." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Maybe you're the one who should be worried. I've already got enough evidence to bring Greg down, and you with him." Emily's eyes widened in fear. "David, please." I didn't want this. I swear I was trying to protect you. Protect me? I laughed bitterly. You've been protecting yourself. But that's over now. I'm not playing your game anymore. She opened her mouth to respond, but we both froze at the sound of footsteps approaching. I turned quickly, scanning the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably hostile. Emily, the man said in a low, menacing voice. You weren't supposed to bring anyone here. She paled. Paul! I didn't. Save it, the man growled, stepping closer. His eyes locked onto me. You're the husband, huh? You've been asking too many questions. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, where I kept my knife. And who the hell are you? Just someone who cleans up messes, he said with a smirk. But you've made one hell of a mess, David. You should have stayed out of this. The tension crackled between us like static electricity. Emily looked terrified, glancing between us as if unsure of what to do. You're not scaring me, I said, my voice low and steady. Good, Paul replied. Because I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to finish this. The man calling himself Paul stepped forward, his footsteps echoing off the cracked pavement. He moved with the kind of calm confidence that only came from experience, like he'd done this before. He wasn't bluffing. He was here to intimidate me, maybe worse. Emily told you to back off, didn't she? Paul said. But you just couldn't help yourself. I stood my ground, keeping my eyes locked on his. You must be Greg's errand boy. Let me guess, he sent you to make sure I stayed quiet? Paul chuckled darkly. Something like that. See, Greg doesn't like loose ends, and right now you're looking real loose. But I'm a reasonable guy. Walk away from this, and I won't have to hurt you. I took a slow breath, weighing my options. Paul was bigger than me, stronger too by the looks of him. But I wasn't about to back down. I needed to buy time, and get inside his head. You think I'm scared of you? I asked, stepping closer. You don't know anything about me. And if you think I'm going to roll over because you showed up with some threats, you've got another thing coming. Paul's expression darkened. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts only get you so far. From the corner of my eye, I saw Emily watching, frozen in fear. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. She wasn't going to help me, and I didn't expect her to. She'd made her choice a long time ago. This was my fight now. Here's the thing, I continued, keeping my voice steady. I've got evidence. Real evidence. Bank records, emails, surveillance footage. Everything I need to take Greg and his whole operation down. You kill me, and that evidence gets released. You really want to take that risk? Paul hesitated, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He hadn't expected that. You're bluffing, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Am I? I countered. You really want to bet your life on it? Because I'm more than happy to let the authorities sort this out. For a moment neither of us moved. The tension between us was electric, like the calm before a storm. I could see Paul weighing his options, calculating whether I was bluffing or not. He didn't know the truth, that I wasn't bluffing at all. I had more than enough to ruin Greg, and if Paul made one wrong move, I'd use every bit of it. Finally, Paul stepped back, shaking his head in frustration. You're a pain in the ass, you know that? Yeah, I've heard that before, I said, keeping my eyes on him. This isn't over, Paul warned, pointing a finger at me. You might have evidence, but that doesn't mean you're untouchable. You're walking a dangerous line. I'll take my chances, I replied coolly. Paul gave me one last glare before turning on his heel and disappearing into the shadows. The sound of his footsteps faded into the night, leaving Emily and me alone once more. Emily collapsed onto the bench, burying her face in her hands. David, you don't understand what you've done. I understand perfectly, I said, crossing my arms. You're in this up to your neck, and now you've dragged me into it too. But I'm not the one who needs to be scared right now. Greg's the one with everything to lose. She looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes. It's not that simple. You think you can just expose him and walk away? These people will come after you. After both of us. Then you should have thought of that before you started laundering money for them. I said coldly. I'm done playing games, Emily. You can either help me take Greg down, or you can go down with him. Emily shook her head slowly. You don't get it. He won't stop until we're both destroyed. Let him try. I shot back. I've got more leverage than he thinks. And the longer you keep lying to me, the worse it's going to get for you. She didn't respond, just stared at the ground in silence. I knew she was afraid of Greg, afraid of the consequences. But I didn't have time to coddle her. I had a plan to execute, and I wasn't about to let fear stop me. Later that night, I contacted Eric again. We needed to move fast, before Greg or his people had a chance to regroup. Paul made contact. I told him over the phone. He tried to scare me off, but I think I got inside his head. Good, Eric said. But don't get cocky. Paul's a dangerous guy. If Greg's sending him out, it means he's getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. I replied. We can use that. Eric chuckled softly. I like the way you think. What's your next move? I'm going to force a confrontation. I said. Greg doesn't know how much I have on him yet. I'm going to make him show his hand. That's risky. Eric warned. If he thinks you're a threat, he might escalate. Let him. I said. The more he panics, the easier it'll be to take him down. All right, Eric said after a pause. Just be careful. You're playing a dangerous game, David. I know, I said quietly. But I'm done being afraid. With the evidence in hand and Greg's people on edge, I knew the next few days would be crucial. It was time to push the pieces into place, and make sure Greg and Emily didn't see the trap closing around them until it was too late. The following day, I put the next phase of my plan into motion. Greg had been lurking in the shadows for too long, letting his people like Paul handle the dirty work. It was time to drag him out into the open, where he couldn't control the narrative. I needed to make him feel cornered, desperate enough to make mistakes. The first step was to create a public disturbance. Using the evidence Eric had given me, I compiled an anonymous package filled with key documents, emails between Greg and his offshore associates, wire transfers tied to Argus Holdings, and an internal memo hinting at blackmail schemes. I sent copies to a handful of journalists I knew would take the bait, along with a simple message. Corruption at Argus Holdings. Follow the money. Within hours, the whispers began. Rumors of a financial scandal circulated online, and by the afternoon, a local news station ran a brief segment hinting at corporate fraud investigations involving Argus. The pressure was building. Around 5 p.m., my phone rang. It was Emily. David, she said, her voice frantic. What did you do? Hello to you too, I replied calmly. Don't play games with me, she snapped. I saw the news. They're talking about Argus. Greg's furious. He knows someone leaked the documents. And he doesn't know it was me, I said evenly. But he will soon. That's the point. David, you don't understand what you're dealing with, she pleaded. Greg is dangerous. He'll come after you. Good, I said coldly. I want him to come after me. It'll make things easier. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Emily finally spoke, her voice softer now. You're trying to trap him, aren't you? Exactly, I said. And if you're smart, you'll help me. Otherwise, you're going down with him. David, you're putting yourself in danger, she whispered. You have no idea what Greg is capable of. Maybe not, I admitted. But I've made it this far. I'm not stopping now. Emily sighed heavily. If you're going to do this, you'll need more than just evidence. Greg's connections run deep. He has people in law enforcement, in the courts. He can make things disappear. Then I'll hit him where it hurts most, I replied. His reputation. His ego. He can't control everything. I'll see what I can do, she said reluctantly. But be careful, David. You're playing with fire. I've been burned before, I said quietly. This time, I'm the one holding the matches. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. David, a familiar voice said. It was Greg. Well, I said, leaning back in my chair. Finally decided to call me yourself. I was starting to think you were afraid. Greg chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You've been busy. Stirring up trouble, leaking documents. I have to admit, you've got guts. More than you, apparently, I shot back. Hiding behind your goons, letting them do the dirty work. How's that working out for you? Careful, Greg warned. You're walking a fine line. You think you've got the upper hand, but you don't know how deep this goes. Actually, I know more than you think, I said. I know about the money laundering, the offshore accounts, the blackmail. I've got enough evidence to bring you and half of Argus Holdings down. Greg was silent for a moment. Then his tone shifted, colder now. What do you want, David? Money? Revenge? You tell me. I want you exposed, I said. I want you to feel what it's like to have everything crumble around you. No more lies, no more cover-ups. Greg laughed bitterly. You really think you're some kind of hero? This isn't a game. People like me don't just go away because someone waves a few documents around. We'll see, I said. I'm giving you one chance, Greg. Meet me in person. We settle this face to face. Or you can keep running like a coward. Your choice. Fine, Greg growled. You want a meeting? You've got it. Tomorrow night. But if you try anything stupid, you won't walk away. Looking forward to it, I said before hanging up. The next day was tense. I spent hours preparing for the meeting, making sure I had backups of all the evidence. I wasn't stupid. I knew Greg might try to ambush me. But I had my own surprise waiting for him. Eric and I coordinated a plan. He would be stationed nearby with a hidden camera, ready to record everything. If Greg threatened me or admitted to any of the crimes, it would all be on tape. This was my chance to nail him once and for all. By the time night fell, I was ready. The meeting was set to take place at an old construction site on the outskirts of town. The place was half-built, abandoned after the funding had mysteriously dried up, a fitting location for a showdown like this. I arrived early, parking a safe distance away and scanning the area for signs of an ambush. Greg's car pulled up 10 minutes later. He stepped out, flanked by two men I recognized from the warehouse incident. Paul was one of them, his expression cold and unreadable. David, Greg said as he approached. You've got my attention. Now what? I smirked. You'll find out soon enough. Greg and his men stood a few feet away, their expressions cold and predatory. Paul hovered near Greg's side, like a silent threat in the shadows. I kept my posture relaxed, though my senses were on high alert. Every instinct screamed that they would try something. You've gone through a lot of trouble to get my attention, Greg said, his tone casual but laced with menace. I'm here. What's your move? I glanced toward the shadows where Eric was stationed. I knew he had the camera rolling, capturing every word. Greg had no idea he was being recorded, and I planned to use that ignorance to my advantage. My move? I echoed, smirking. I think you already know what it is. I have the documents. All of them. You and your friends at Argus have been laundering money for years, and I've got enough evidence to bury you. Greg folded his arms. Evidence doesn't mean shit if no one believes you. I've got connections, judges, cops. You're way out of your depth, David. Maybe, I said, taking a step closer. But scandals have a way of going viral. One good leak to the right journalists, and your whole empire crumbles. You can't buy silence once the public's watching. Greg's expression hardened. You think you're some kind of crusader? Let me guess, this is about revenge, isn't it? You found out about Emily and me, and now you want payback. I chuckled softly. You flatter yourself. The affair was just a spark. This is about your arrogance. You thought you could control everything, lie, cheat, steal, and get away with it. But now, I'm holding the strings. Paul stepped forward, his jaw tightening. You're talking a lot for someone standing here alone. Am I? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Take a good look around. You think I'd walk into this without a plan? Paul hesitated, glancing around the construction site. I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. He knew I was baiting him, but he couldn't tell if it was a bluff or not. Greg waved him off. Don't let him get inside your head. He's just trying to rattle us. Am I? I repeated, folding my arms. You sure about that? Greg exhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin. Enough games. You want to make a deal? Fine. Name your price. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. All right. Here's the deal. You walk away from Argus. Resign. Hand over control to your shareholders and disappear. If you don't, I'll release everything, your transactions, your partnerships, even those private meetings you had offshore. The authorities won't be able to ignore it. And you think I'd actually agree to that? Greg sneered. You don't have a choice, I said. You either lose everything quietly or publicly. Your call. The silence that followed was tense, every second stretched like a wire ready to snap. Greg's jaw clenched as he weighed his options. He knew I was right. No matter how many people he had in his pocket, a public scandal would destroy his reputation and his power. Finally, he spoke. You're making a big mistake, David. No, I said quietly. The mistake was underestimating me. Greg gave a sharp nod to Paul, who stepped forward again. I tensed, ready for a fight, but Paul didn't attack. Instead, he pulled out a phone and handed it to Greg. We're not finished here, Greg said as he backed away. You think you've won, but this isn't over. We'll see, I replied, watching him closely. Better hope you make the right choice. Without another word, Greg turned and walked back to his car, Paul and the other man following close behind. I stood there until their taillights disappeared into the distance. The moment they were gone, Eric emerged from the shadows, a sly grin on his face. That was intense. You got it all? I asked. Every word, Eric confirmed, holding up the camera. Greg's arrogance is going to be his downfall. We've got him on tape threatening you and admitting to the scheme. Good, I said, exhaling slowly. Now it's time to make our next move. Later that night, I sent copies of the recording to several trusted contacts, reporters, lawyers, and whistleblower organizations. I made sure to include every piece of evidence we had gathered, ensuring that Greg's entire operation was laid bare. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Argus Holdings CEO under investigation for financial crimes. Leaked documents reveal massive money laundering network. Greg's empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Emily called me again, her voice panicked. David, what the hell did you do? The news, it's everywhere. I did what needed to be done, I replied coldly. Greg's finished. And so are you if you try to protect him. I didn't want this, she whispered. I just wanted to keep us safe. You should have thought of that before you got involved, I said. Now you have to live with the consequences. She didn't respond, and I ended the call. By the afternoon, Greg's resignation was announced. The board of Argus Holdings issued a statement distancing themselves from him, and federal investigators were already moving in to seize company records. Eric and I had done what we set out to do. But for me, the victory was personal. Greg had tried to destroy my life, my marriage, my trust. He thought he could manipulate me like a pawn. Now, he was the one cornered, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. It was over. And I had won. Greg's downfall played out like a slow-motion car crash. By midday, news vans swarmed Argus Holdings headquarters. Reporters camped outside, shoving microphones into the faces of anyone entering or leaving the building. The leaked evidence was spreading like wildfire. His name was plastered across every major outlet: Greg Mathers, disgraced CEO at the center of a massive financial scandal. He couldn't hide anymore. Every secret he'd buried was now public knowledge. I stood in my living room, watching the coverage unfold on the TV. A reporter in a crisp blue suit stood in front of the Argus building, reading off the latest developments. Sources confirmed that federal agents are preparing to raid several properties tied to Mathers and his associates. Meanwhile, shareholders have filed emergency lawsuits, citing corporate fraud and financial mismanagement. I sipped my coffee, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. It was surreal, seeing it all come crashing down. For weeks, Greg had controlled the narrative, manipulating everyone around him. Now, he was just another fallen titan, scrambling to salvage what little dignity he had left. My phone buzzed. It was Eric. "Did you see the news?" he asked, his voice brimming with satisfaction. "Yeah," I replied. "It's over for him." "Not just him," Eric added. "I've been hearing things. His associates are jumping ship. Some of them are already cooperating with the feds. Greg's going to be isolated. No allies, no protection." "Good," I said. "That's exactly what he deserves." Eric paused for a moment. "And what about Emily?" The question hung in the air like a cold breeze. Emily. The woman I'd built my life with, the woman who had betrayed me in more ways than one. I thought back to our last conversation, the fear in her voice as she begged me to back off. Was she scared for me, or just for herself? "She's not my problem anymore," I said quietly. "She made her choices." "Fair enough," Eric replied. "Still, it's not easy, cutting ties like that." "It has to be done," I said firmly. "People like Greg and Emily? They thrive on deception. They think they can control everyone around them. But not anymore." Eric chuckled softly. "You've got a hell of a backbone, David. Most people would have folded under the pressure." "I didn't have a choice," I said. "I wasn't going to let them destroy me." Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Emily showed up at the house, her face pale and drawn. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. I stood in the doorway, blocking her path. "David, please," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms, my expression cold. "Talk about what?" "How you lied to me for years. How you put both of us in danger." "Greg manipulated me," she insisted. "I didn't know how deep it went at first. By the time I did, I couldn't get out. He threatened me, threatened us. And you thought the best solution was to keep lying to me?" I shot back. "Do you even hear yourself, Emily? You let him control you. And for what? Money? Power?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I was scared, David. I didn't know who to trust." "You should have trusted me," I said, my voice softer now but no less firm. "Instead, you chose him. And now you're paying the price." Emily wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. "I lost everything," she whispered. "My career, our marriage. I just wanted to protect what we had. You destroyed it," I said bluntly. "You can't protect something by lying. You only tear it apart." She nodded slowly, as if the truth of my words was finally sinking in. "I'm sorry. For everything." I stared at her for a long moment, feeling a strange mix of anger and pity. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe that she could change. But another part of me knew better. The damage was done. There was no going back. "I hope you find a way to fix your life," I said quietly. "But it won't be with me." Emily blinked, as if the finality of my words had struck her like a slap. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Finally, she nodded, turned, and walked away. I watched her leave, feeling an odd sense of closure. For the first time in weeks, the weight on my chest lifted. It was over. That night, I met Eric for one last time. We sat on the rooftop of an old parking garage, overlooking the city lights. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of rain. "You did it," Eric said, raising a bottle of beer and a mock toast. Greg's empire is in ruins. The authorities are closing in. He's finished. Yeah, I said, clinking my bottle against his. But I didn't do it alone. Still, Eric said, leaning against the railing. You played the long game and won. Not many people can say that. I took a long sip of my beer, letting the silence settle between us. The city below buzzed with life, oblivious to the battles we had fought in the shadows. It was a strange feeling, victory without celebration. But I wasn't looking for glory. I'd gotten what I wanted, the truth and justice. So, Eric said after a while, what's next for you? I don't know, I admitted. But it's going to be on my terms this time. No more lies. No more manipulation. Sounds like a good plan, Eric said with a grin. You've earned it. We sat there for a while longer, watching the world go on. For the first time in a long time, I felt free.